Okay, well, we might get started. Welcome along, everybody, to the next instalment in our Indigenous and Transcultural Research Centre Partnership Series. We'd like to welcome today Associate Professor Harriot Beazley and along with Dr. Roswita Aboe, who will be talking today about reviving heritage, reclaiming spaces, decolonizing narratives through youth arts. And is it Ternate? North
Ternate, yeah.
Ternate, North Maluku. Yeah. So on that very dodgy introduction, I think I'll just hand over to Harriet, who can take us forward. Looking forward to this today, Harriet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm panicking a bit here because I'm trying to find the right slides. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I would like to first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I am sitting today, which are the Gubbi Gubbi people. I'm in Noosa, Sunrise Beach in Noosa. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully I've got the right stack of slides because I've got two lots. Okay, so I don't think that my co-presenter is here yet, but she might jump on soon. She's actually in Ternate. But that's the title of the. I'm really excited and keen to get some feedback on this actually. So I'm delighted. Thank you everyone for making the time to come. And some of the people here, I'm quite sure will be able to give me some great feedback. I haven't written the paper yet, so. But it's the title at the moment is Reviving Heritage, Reclaiming Spaces, Decolonizing Narratives Through Youth Arts in Ternate, which is in North Maluku in Indonesia. I just want to let you know that this is part of a larger collaboration, which we've called ourselves the Ternate Heritage and Spices Collaboration Team. And we have an MOU between the University of the Sunshine Coast and Khairun University in Ternate. So Dr. Roswita Aboe is at the University of Khairun, and she's a lecturer there, a member of staff there, but she's also the manager of the Office of International Affairs. And Mr. Chris Sayum-Sudin is the head of the Provincial Tourism Office in North Maluku. And he's been to the university before, to the University of the Sunshine Coast. He was part of an Australian awards program, which actually funded Ibu Roswita and Chris to come to Australia, and that's what really started the connection. And it was initially through Professor Bill Carter, who has now retired from UniSC, adjunct professor, Professor Noel Scott, and also much involved has been one of my master's students, Michelle Prasad. She's now graduated, but she's been really involved in the project as well. So the presenters today are myself, Harriot Beazley. I'm an associate professor in human geography at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and Ibu Roswita, or Dr. Ibu Roswita Aboe, who is at Khairun University. Now, this paper we delivered in July. Gosh, we're already in October. It feels like we're still recently, but we delivered it in July. At the European Southeast Asian Studies Conference, and it was for a session on youth performance in Southeast Asia, and I was invited to present to that panel, and Ibu Roswita and I had a chat, and we decided that this would be a great topic to present to the conference, which indeed it was. So the focus of the research are the Sanggar Gamalamo, which is a youth arts group. Sanggar is an arts group. Gamalamo is the name of the village in which they are based. And they created something called the Gamalamo Arts Festival. And it is all youth led. and they are very interested in their cultural heritage and also in the colonial past. And what they did was they made a performance for a particular event that took place in 1570, which was the tragedy of the killing of the Sultan Khairun by the Portuguese. And they performed it actually in the ruins of the Portuguese Castela fort. And what they did was create an amazing performance of dance and music and poetry recital in the local language, in the Ternate language. And the music was traditional music with traditional musical instruments and traditional dancing. And I'll talk about that more in this presentation and the relevance of it in terms of my own sort of theoretical musings. Well, Ibu Roswita and my theoretical musings about this this particular approach. The theoretical framework that we used was, I'm a children's geographer. That's my area of research, children and young people's geographies. And so I really sort of engaged with space, place and identity and children's connection to place and young people's connection to place as a theoretical lens upon which to explore the experiences of these young people as they created and then performed this performance in the fort. I've also drawn on Madgen's work and youth and cultural heritage and youth appreciation of their cultural heritage. And then I stumbled across and I found incredibly useful Yutun Sastramadaja's work on urban youth engagement with their colonial past in Kota Tua, which means the old city in Jakarta. And what I loved about her work was that she was really interested in how that space, Kota Tua, had been neglected since independence, since 1949. After independence, there was, a real focus on nationalism, and a lot of colonial spaces became neglected and forgotten. But as we've moved on in time, young people have become more interested in their colonial heritage and colonial buildings. And so her research was about youth engagement with that space and how they engaged with it. And what she talked about is representing new modalities of memory. That was the phrase that she used, that disrupt official national narratives of national history. And I found it incredibly useful for this particular research project. So I just want to give you a quick overview of Ternate for those of you that are not familiar with where it is. And I'm just checking, Maria, if you wouldn't mind letting me know if Ibu Roswita comes into the meeting, because I want to acknowledge that when she does.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the brief cottage history of Ternate is that it was very much at the centre of the fort, of the sort of spice. Well, they are the Spice Islands, basically. They are. Many of us grew up learning about the Spice Islands through the colonial East India Shipping Company and the Dutch, the West Indian Shipping Company, and Dutch VOC it was called. And Ternate and Tidore at that time were the sole producers of nutmeg and cloves and cinnamon. And so everyone wanted to have control of those spices, and they created a monopoly. They stopped other people growing it, and they really had strong control over it. But there was also a real battle between the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the English for the control of the spice trade at that time. And at the midst of all this, or at the height of it, really, in 1570, the Portuguese killed the Sultan of Khairun on the 28th of February 1570, and that's what the youth performance is about. So I'll just show you where Ternate is, so you can have a bit of an understanding. So if you can imagine Singapore's over here, so sort of flying directly east, you will reach Ternate and Tidore Islands near Halmahera, and sort of directly north of Timor-Leste. So just you've got and it actually takes a number of hours to fly from Jakarta to Ternate. It's quite hard to get to. So as I said, the setting of the performance is Ternate Island and the Kastela Fort. And this rich history of forts and spices is what's the backdrop to this story. So as I said, there was Portuguese from 1512 to around 1575. Well, 1575, and that's part of this story actually. And then the Spanish had most of the control between 1606 and 1663. The Dutch came in later, and the British after that. When the Portuguese were there, they arrived on the beach of Ternate in 1512, and right where they arrived on the beach, they built the Kastela fort in 1522. So the plot of this performance is that the Portuguese governor invited the Sultan of Khairun to dinner at the fort on the February 28th, 1570. He was stabbed in the back, and he was duped basically that he was being invited for negotiations over the spice trade. What they didn't bank on, Portuguese, because they thought that they were going to get they were going to have control over the spice trade once they'd killed the Sultan. What they hadn't banked on was that he had a son who was a very much celebrated and skilled soldier called Baabullah. And he ascended to the position of Sultan when his father was killed, and he vowed to avenge his father's death and expel the Portuguese from the island. So he was very much enraged, and he incited the Ternate people to put the Portuguese under siege in their own fort, and they held them there for 5 years. And I've read very graphic accounts of, because the Portuguese documented it when they were under siege, of having to eat rats and, really having a terrible time of trying to survive. And Sultan Baabullah was celebrated for his negotiation skills, because he didn't just go in and kill them all. He actually invited them to leave. He basically evicted them. So they actually were forced onto their ships and set sail away from Ternate. And due to this, I just found this out recently, that due to his mastery in war and diplomacy, he was actually named a national hero in November 2020. When I went to Ternate, I was fascinated by this story, and I went to the site, so this is a Portuguese depiction of the map of the fort and at that time. And what I found really interesting about the site as a geographer was that when you walk into the fort, there was a monument and there were murals about this particular event, the killing of Sultan Baabullah. Sorry, the killing of Sultan Khairun by the Portuguese. Now, this is the monument that sits at the entrance to the ruins of the fort, and the ruins are very much they're neglected. There's not anything happening there, but there is this big statue, and that thing in the middle is actually a fist going up into the air, which is in the shape of a clove. And then on each side is a different mural which depicts the stabbing. The one on the left is the stabbing in the back, and in the middle is the stabbing on the back. And then the top right is actually the Portuguese, the Ternate people rising up to fight and lay the siege to the Portuguese. And in the bottom right, there's a bit of shade there, but you can see the ship depicted there and being sent off by the Ternate people, so being sent away. I was really struck when I looked at the ruins. These are my own photos. I was really struck when I looked at the ruins of how they, if it was in England, for example, it would be really well maintained and there would be really fantastic signage explaining everything, but it was, pretty much been ignored. And then I go back to, I mentioned her, Uten Sastranamajaj's work, and she said after the long independent struggle to Indonesians, the idea of preserving colonial heritage seemed nothing short of ludicrous. And in fact, the only thing that they did was, it was very much a sort of Suharto style statue, that the photo I just showed you, was to sort of celebrate the fact that the Portuguese had been driven out by the Ternatians. And Sastro Majaja goes on to say that this sort of reluctance of preserving colonial heritage is indicative of the discomfort of official memory discourses towards the colonial past. And authorities were really unsure about what to do with this place. And so ignoring it seemed like the best option. Now, here she's talking about Kota Tua, which is in Jakarta, but I would say that this very much applies for the Kastela fort and other forts on the island, which I think only very, very recently the Ternate people have, and Pak Chris, who I mentioned earlier, who's the head of the tourism, are beginning to realise how much interest that tourists would have in these ruins and in this history, not least because we all grew up learning about the Spice Islands. This is the mural that I found. So this is the very beach actually where the Portuguese arrived, and the fort is just to the right here behind those trees. And this mural I found, it was just along the wall, and it depicts the same story, the arrival of the Portuguese, they're sort of finding the spices, and then the next part of the mural along the wall on the beachfront is the stabbing again of the Sultan in the back. And then the fighting against the Portuguese between the Ternatians, and then this is, leave, being do usir, which means evicted from the island, and then the Sultan walking into the palace at the very end of the mural, and here they are being sent off on their ships. So it's a very strong story in the Ternate mind, but it's not very well. Well, some people in Ternate, but at the same time, when we started to talk to the youth theatre group, we realised that it was the story that they really wanted to emphasise, and the struggle of the story of Sultan Khairun against the Portuguese and Sultan Baabullah. So I'm moving now to having given you the backdrop and the setting the scene and telling you about the plot and the characters. I'm now going to talk about the performance, which is the rest of the focus of this presentation. So the performance was focused on the tragedy of the killing of the Sultan Khairun. What I find fascinating about this whole performance is that it was performed on the same day, on February the 28th, in the same place, in Fort Kastela, that the murder took place. And the theatre group, first of all, called themselves Nostra Senhora del Rosario, which is a Portuguese word, which was the Portuguese name given to the fort. And the original name, as the original name of the Kastela fort. But the theatre group, once they started talking about what they were doing, they actually changed their name to the name of the village where the fort was built. So this is something that I'm thinking of in terms of my analysis and writing the paper, that as part of this decolonizing, in terms of decolonizing the place, but also decolonizing their own name as a theatre group. And they changed it to the Sanggar Gamalamo, which is the name of the village. And the performance was through dance, music, and poetry recital. There were over 50 performers. And they used oral literature, which conveyed traditional Ternate values. They used traditional music with traditional music instruments, the tifa drums, the saragai gong, and the tawa tawa gong. And also, really interestingly, they used the traditional dance, which is called the soya soya dance. And soya soya means unyielding. And I will tell you a bit more about that dance in a minute. So I'm a bit conscious of time and also technology. Maria was talking about wonderful technology earlier, and I'm a bit anxious that if I try and show you this YouTube clip, that it won't. Do you think I should try, or what do you think? Do you think I should try and open it? I always get problems when I'm trying to do videos on screen.
You can always try, and then worst case scenario, put it in the chat, and we can all go and
Oh, that's a good idea.
watch it,
Yes.
but we would have to maybe mute or something.
I think
See how you go.
I think it's the volume that always seems to get me when I try and do this. So can you see that?
No, we're still looking at your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm sure that I'm sure oh, now I can't close it. And I'm sure there's something that that I need to do. Normally I've got students to help me with it. Probably what I'll do, I'll just take it. So this particular, I'm just going to take it and put it in the chat. So this particular, which of course I'm not going to be able to do while I'm really just exposing all my technological defects to you all. I'll do it when I get out of the presentation, because I can't see where the chat is when I'm giving a presentation. But that's just the planning of that video is of the planning of the actual performance. I think I have to stop share to share in the chat, don't I? Anyway, you're not going to watch it while you're listening to me anyway, so I'll do it in a minute. So there's so many elements about this performance, which is just so incredibly clever and carefully thought out and, you know, quite brilliant, really. So the poetry recital and oral literature was all based on the unique characteristics of Ternate literature. So Doro Bololo, Dalil Moro, and Dalil Tifa are the three main characteristics for telling story, for storytelling in Ternate culture. And I read up on this, I found some articles about it, and basically poetry and narration in Ternate were used as an implementation of the noble character values that were applied by our parents in ancient times in the form of oral literature. So, you know, much the same as our own indigenous oral culture, these values are communicated through poetry and through recital. And so that's how they told the story, was through the use of the Ternate language, and really emphasizing the values of the noble character, and also emphasizing good and evil, and emphasizing good against evil, and how important Ternate values are. So within the narration and the poetry, there was moral and ethical values and messages that were being presented to influence the audience. This is what the directors and the those involved in the performance told us when we interviewed them. And it's also about the implementation of customary values, which have to be maintained and preserved, which I also think is really interesting, because that's what the directors told us that they wanted to do, that they want to preserve these customary values. Now, I've got that information from Adam and Ali from 2023, but it very much speaks to what the aims were of the theatre, of the performance directors. So this was from the director Fadli, and he said that the Portuguese, and this is his photo of the moment where the Portuguese were killing the Sultan, and he says the Portuguese murdered Sultan Khairun when the Portuguese invited the Sultan to dinner when they arrived at the Portuguese palace. The message of the performance is that even though he was very brave and firm, Sultan Khairun was deceived. This gives the message that we should not trust our friends too much, especially if they're strangers and also have evil intentions. So it's really kind of, you know, using this historical account to reaffirm some Ternate values. And this is a photo of when the Sultan was killed in the performance, and he's been carried off by the people of Kaioa, which is a particular island. Immediately, the residents were furious with the news of the death of Sultan Khairun Jamil, and that led directly by the people from Kaioa who picked up the Sultan Khairun's body. And it was from here that the Soya Soya dance was born. Now, the Soya Soya dance is a dance that is performed at every opening ceremony now in Ternate when you go there. It's a very, you know, it's people are very proud of the dance. And I find it really fascinating that this dance is directly connected to the killing of the Sultan and to Sultan Baabullah's uprising, because the Soya dance was performed apparently, or it was created to evict the Portuguese from the island. So what happens after the Sultan is killed in the performance is the dance troupe comes on and they start performing the Soya dance, and they start performing it with the to the accompaniment of Ternate musical instruments. So I've just got a bit of background here about the traditional dance. So they say that it was created by Sultan Baabullah for the troops after the death of Khairun. Soya means unyielding, and it's a dance of war and liberation from the hands of the Portuguese. And the dance movements depict attacking, evading, and defending, as in war, and a determination to defend their territory. And I see culture. And Zul, the choreographer of the dance, he said, we want to convey the tragic history of the murder of Sultan Khairun to the audience, and at the same time remember his death. The Soya dance introduces local history and culture to the younger generation and the wider community. So through this dance, we were able to convey and appreciate the values of courage, unity, and unyielding spirit contained in local history and culture. As you can see, this is why I'm very excited to hear some of your thoughts, because I was so excited with the information that I was given.
Sorry, Harriet. Sorry, Renee here. Since our YouTube clip, we haven't seen your screen.
Oh, no.
And a few times you've referred to beautiful pictures, so I thought I'd let you know. Sorry, darling.
Nobody told me. How am I go? Goodness me.
It's only been for the last minute or two.
What are you looking at?
Oh, everyone.
Why? Okay, I'm going to stop share and I'm going to reshare. Thanks for letting me know.
Susan says she can. I can't.
Oh.
It could just be me. Forgive me if it's just me.
Okay, that's strange. Okay, can you see that now?
I can.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. That's terrific.
So these are the pictures I was talking about: the killing and then the carrying off of the body, and then the Soya dance, which is a traditional dance that's performed at every official opening ceremony, every tourist event. And then I was just telling you a little about the Soya dance. These images are just from the internet. They're not actually from the actual performance, although I like this one because it is at a fort. So the other thing about this dance, so they start performing this dance. And then the other thing about it is that when they're performing it, the audience starts to participate and the dancers go into a trance-like state. So what the choreographer said is it's very important for the dance to be performed live so that our community not only knows but can see, feel and hear directly how the incident happened. And during the performance, the Soya dance movements and rhythm of the music created a mystical happening, and the dancers went into a deep into the dance and into a trance-like state. It genuinely happened, because I was like, was that part of the performance, the trance? Or they said, no, it was genuinely happened, that the dancers went into the trance-like state and they started to fall down. And spontaneously, he said, sometimes you just fall down spontaneously and your body is possessed. And what happened was the audience also started to go into a trance. The audience joined the dancing and they started to dance the Soya dance. And then they went into a trance and they started collapsing. Or possessed, as it was described to me. Now, this is where, again, I'm sorry, I can't show you because of my technological inability to show you the video, but I'll share you this video because it's a video of the actual performance that I'm talking about and the moments when the audience started to join in and started to dance and to go into a trance-like state. And I'll share that back with you when I'm off sharing screen. So I think, just to conclude, I just wanted to theoretically, I wanted to discuss with my colleagues at the ITRC and other people that are here, the sort of theoretical analysis of all of this, because it's really interesting in terms of cultural heritage as an inspiration for Ternate youth. It's really interesting from my perspective about youth's connection to place and, sort of overwriting that nationalist discourse and going back to a more culturally defined and celebration of Ternate indigenous culture. So I think that this is an example of Ternate's history and heritage as an inspiration. I see it as breaking the pattern of neglect, and this is what I was saying about Sastra Madaja's work, breaking the pattern of neglect of Ternate's colonial heritage. Now, I've used the word decolonizing here, decolonizing the Ternate landscape, but I'm sort of talking about decolonization also in terms of a nationalist colonization, in terms of Javanese colonization, and seeing it very explicit. I mean, obviously Portuguese, but I don't know, I'm wrestling with that bit, which I'd be really, really interested to hear what you say, because I'm also thinking about, is it re-indigenizing or is it decolonizing? In any, it's seeing it from a Ternate youth perspective, because all the people that were involved were, between the ages of 15 and 25, including the directors and the choreographers who we interviewed. And we also interviewed some of the dancers and the narrators and the poets. And personally, I see that the Sanggar group has successfully re-inscribed Fort Kastela away from colonial narratives of the Spice Islands and potentially nationalist narratives of nationalism, of, sort of nation state discourses, towards traditional values and traditional morals. And in this way, I see that youth identities are created, creating new modalities of memory in exactly the way that Sastra Madjaja is talking about it in the context of Kota Tua and Jakarta. It was clearly a really dramatic performance. I actually gave this presentation 2 days ago to an international seminar on Fort Kastela, on cultural tourism in Ternate, which was chaired by PAC's Chris at the tourism office, and everyone present were involved in Ternate tourism. And I was really interested to know what they thought, and that people who were present, including Pat Chris, said it was such a powerful performance. Everybody had goosebumps. If they weren't going into a trance, they actually had goosebumps, and there was a visceral reaction to the performance. Everybody was talking about it. It was all over social media. So it was really dramatic. It engaged with Ternate's cultural heritage through traditional music, dance, poetry, and performance, all inspired by Ternate's rich history, not anything else about it, not Indonesia, Ternate. The aim, as far as the choreographers and the directors and the performers, was to remind youth of their Ternate identity and to empower them to embrace their traditional culture and practices and to create positive self-identities. And I really loved that about, when they were recounting it, it was about this reclaiming of identity as well. These are just a couple of quotes. Begitu indah masa masa dulu. So what that means is that the past is actually really beautiful. It's really good to engage with the past. With the colonial past, this is one of the directors. With the colonial past, before people wanted to forget and to keep it silent, which speaks directly to what Sultan Sastra Madjaja was saying. Now young people feel that things happened in the past should be remembered to keep the history of Kastela Fort alive. And this is what came really through strongly to me, that they want to remember the past. They want to remember the colonial history. We want the Sanggar to continue to develop so that the young people in our place are directed on a positive path and carry out these activities every year, because Sultan Khairun is a figure who is very synonymous with the island of Ternate. And indeed, the university is named after him. Final reflections from the youth on their performance. Youth need to be exposed to the history of the past so people know about Kastela and its history, our ceremonies, our customs and traditions, and where they come from. Although it is a tragic story, from my perspective, it is more of a celebration. The traditional music brought everyone together by using local language in poetry and narration, music and dance. Old and young people were connected by the music and the dancing. We hope that positive activities like this held by the younger generation can be of special attention to the government so that they can more fully support things like this. Hopefully our current generation will not forget their identity. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Harriet. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, really